our mind now has gone through a time gate. We have gone down to the skies of 10,500 BC. We are now in the skies of 10,500 BC, and we have followed the clues. Consider this constellation. Think of it in terms of its first time. We go and we get a lock. Now consider that this happens and only happens in 10,500 BC when the sun is rising on the spring equinox. They're drawing our attention to the rising sun on the spring equinox. There's something important there in the sky that they desperately want us to know about. If we are intelligent, if we can get the prime number transmitted, that's what they're doing. And what is there? What we're pointing at is the Sphinx. The Sphinx is looking due east on the day of the rising sun at the spring equinox. Now, as all of us know, the sun does not rise at the same place throughout the year. On the day of the summer solstice, it rises here, and if you were at Giza, it would be 28 degrees to the left of due east. It would be rising here. Go 6 months later to the winter solstice, and it would be rising here 28 degrees to the right of due east. And on the equinox, it rises due east. The Sphinx is gazing due east on the day of the spring equinox. In fact, this picture was taken on the day of the spring equinox this year. So the Sphinx is without question an equinoctial marker. And in this case, the clue is an equinoctial marker of the spring. We are asked to consider and to see in the sky what the Sphinx is looking at on that spring equinox in 10,500 BC. What can there be for us to be so interested and for them to have gone to all this trouble to convey the message? I will dispense with the identification of the Sphinx. Graham has so eloquently described the argument. There is no question about the Sphinx being an image of Khafra. It is not Khafra. It is a fact. This is established. We have gone through the textual argument, the inventory stela, as Graham Hancock has described, which Egyptologists dispense as some sort of fiction. Whereas, as you were told, they much rely on the famous syllable, Khaf. I hope you've covered this, Graham. I was away. Have you?
Yes.
Thank you. We've done that. Now, let's look at this stela carefully. Graham has shown you this. The famous syllable with the re enclosed. And what it tells us, that's what this stela is telling us, is that the statue was not built for Khafra or anybody else. It was built for Atum Har Makis. Now, we have encountered Atum as the creator god, the god of Genesis, the god of the first time. Who is Harmakis? Well, we have to contend here with a Grecian rendition of an ancient Egyptian term. It actually means Horem Achet, translating as Horus in the horizon. You will remember that they called the necropolis the horizon, and they see the Sphinx as Horus of the horizon. That's what they're telling us. They're telling us something else. They're telling us that this Horus of the horizon, in the horizon of Giza, is marking the splendid place of the beginning of time. Here is a typical confusion, this broken telephone, this message being transmitted through translation, a little bit distorted, because you will see that what the translator should have done is actually, luckily, put a little annotation to tell us what is the real translation. is that the beginning of time, the splendid place of the beginning of time, is literally the first time. Step Zepi, which we have dated in 10,500 BC with our own calendrical system, using the stars of Orion's belt. Step Zepi. The ancient Egyptians themselves, a Horus king, a high initiate, is saying the Sphinx is marking the splendid place of Tep Zepi. Of course, ignored and dispensed by the Egyptologists. Let's see who is the Sphinx if we use this kind of logic. They tell us Horem Achet, Horus in the horizon. Well, we can understand this. Horus is a deity, the son of Osiris, at the first time, and they speak of the Sphinx being a marker of the first time. Well, we have a date now. Horus in the horizon. But they also nominate the Sphinx Hor Acti, with a subtle difference. Horus of the horizon. Remember this dual way of playing around with their thoughts. Clearly, they're inviting us to consider a celestial Horus of the horizon, one they call Hor Acti, Horus of the real horizon. Let's examine this. But first, let's deal with another anomalistic situation with Egyptologists. They say that the pyramid builders and those who composed the pyramid text did not mention the Sphinx. Indeed, the ancient Egyptians do not talk about the Sphinx, Egyptologists tell us, until the New Kingdom, until Thutmose and other pharaohs put these stelas at Giza and nominate the Sphinx Hor Em Achet and Horakti. They are right. There are no references to Hor Em Achet in the horizon, Horus in the horizon, in the pyramid text. But remember the astroglyphic language. Now, this is like saying that if you were to examine the four Gospels, there wouldn't be a reference of Jesus. This was the greatest monument they built then, and surely they would have referred to it. Well, they did. They did so, because the pyramid text contained hundreds and hundreds of references to Horakti, Horus of the horizon, the astronomical, the stellar twin of whoever Horus in the horizon is supposed to represent. Now, let's look at this very carefully. The Horus king undergoes a journey, we are told in the pyramid text. The Horus king is the living son of Osiris, and before he will depart and join Osiris in the sky, he represents the life force on the ground. He represents the sun. There is no question about this. And in his journey, he is asked to identify himself to the sun and undertake a journey on the land and in the sky simultaneously, intellectually projecting himself as the sun disk in the sky. And the final moment, the culmination moment, the apotheosis of his journey is this. They tell him to position himself 70 days before the sunrise on the day of the summer solstice. 70 days before, and they tell him that he is to position himself on the banks of the winding waterway near the celestial bull. All this information is in the pyramid text. You'll find it in Keeper of Genesis. Well, we can reconstruct that. The pyramid texts were compiled in 2500 BC. We set our computer to 2500 BC, and we go to the summer solstice. This is what you would see in the east. In the summer solstice, 70 days before the event. 70 days before the summer solstice. And sure enough, when you do that, again, verifiable facts, you'll find that the sun is indeed positioned next to the bull of the sky, Taurus, on the banks of the Milky Way. They tell us this, and when we check it, it is so. And they tell us now that the Horus king, the solar disk, must cross the celestial river and reach the eastern horizon 70 days later. And when he does so, he will coalesce, he will merge, he will become one with Horakti, with Horus of the horizon. So let's see what happens. We simply follow instructions. And when we do that, this is what happens 70 days later. The sun is in the pose of the constellation of Leo. He is merged, he is entering Horakti, Horus of the horizon. And if Horakti is Leo, and if Horakti is Horem Achet, and if Horem Achet is the Sphinx, then Leo is the counterpart of the Sphinx. He is his celestial twin. It is a fact. Now, there is a problem with this situation. We're looking at the summer solstice of 2500 BC, and it occurs, as we have said, 28 degrees to the right of due east. Remember, the Sphinx looks due east. Now, we know for sure that the ancient Egyptians were extremely clever astronomers. We have shown this. We know for sure that they were capable of aligning monuments to incredible precision, 5% of a single degree on a monument that's 6.5 million tons in weight. They have proved their ability to align monuments to the solstices. One example is this. You're looking at the rising of the sun, this picture taken by Santa Hancock, on the day of the winter solstice at the temple of Karnak. You're looking at the axis of the temple along those marvelous columns, and the sun rising bang on, precisely in the alignment of the axis on the winter solstice. You go on the other side of the Nile, at Luxor, and you're looking at the so-called colossi of Memnon, monuments, statues that weigh 1,000 tons. Very, very difficult to move. And they were aligned perfectly, again, to the rising sun. They gaze at the rising sun at the winter solstice. They knew how to do it, and they knew how to do it with precision, and with big monuments. There's no question about it. So, why did they make that radical faux pas, this error? Why does Horus in the horizon, the Sphinx, is he gazing due east and not at his celestial counterpart, Horus of the horizon? Could it be possible that these people who align monuments to 5% of a single degree make a mistake of 28 degrees? Why is Horus of the horizon in the wrong place? Again, are we asking the question in the wrong way? Is it possible that Horus of the horizon, that Leo is not in the wrong place, but at the wrong time? Is there a time when he would align perfectly with his counterpart on the ground? In this way? Well, there is. And for that, we must consider another mechanistic event happening in the sky with the precession of the equinox. We've seen how the precession of the equinox causes Orion's belt to seesaw up and down. Well, what we have also is an effect influencing the position of the sun at the spring equinox, the station of the sun at the spring equinox along what we call the zodiacal belt or the ecliptic belt. You're only seeing half of it here. There is 12 constellations across which the sun appears to travel in its annual course. But because of the precession of the equinoxes, the position where the sun is during the spring equinox. Now, for example, in the Pyramid Age, it would be about here, near the constellation of Taurus. But because of precession, the constellation appear to move like a carousel, so that the point of the spring equinox changes with the background constellation. Let me explain this in visual terms. If you were to stand in front of the Sphinx today, in his pose, looking due east at the spring equinox today, this is what you would see. The sun rising due east on the spring equinox, and the background stars are Pisces and Aquarius. This is the position, the point of the spring equinox. Soon, the constellation of Aquarius would appear to shift so it occupies the background behind the sun. This is why we say that the age of Aquarius is soon to come. At the time of Jesus, it was the constellation of Pisces. It would have been behind here. This is why the Christians use the iconography of the fish. It was the beginning of the astrological age of Pisces. With the Egyptians, they knew this very well, because here you see the sunrise at the spring equinox in 1400 BC, the time of Tutankhamun, in the constellation of Aries, the ram. And we know that the iconography of the ancient Egyptians at that time was intensely to do with rams. The alleyways at Karnak and at Luxor are ram monuments. And here is the constellation of Taurus. In 2500 BC, that constellation would have been behind the sun. In 2500 BC, the age that the Sphinx is supposed to have been built according to Egyptologists. And at that age, the age of the bull, the Egyptians knew that this was the age of the bull, because they started the so-called Apis cult of the bull, the cult of the Apis bull. We know that the ancient Greeks also did that in the time of the Chronos civilization. They knew that this was the age of the bull. They would have built an equinoctial marker to match the age. They did not. They did not build a gigantic bull. They built a gigantic lion as an equinoctial marker. This is what they had in mind. A marker to mark a certain age. What is that age? Well, it is precisely at the time when the constellation of Orion marks its first time, 10,500 BC. You will remember that as the constellation of Orion strikes the meridian in 10,500 BC, in this configuration, the sun is rising due east at the spring equinox. This is what you would see at precisely that age, marking the age of Leo. Now, what makes this an unlikely coincidence is this. When the sun strikes the horizon, due east, were you to turn 90 degrees and look at this meridian direction, the direction that the pyramid builders have insisted we should look at, we will see the constellation of Orion striking the meridian. We have exactly a lock happening, and only happening in 10,500 BC. This is what you have. The constellation striking its low point in 10,500 BC at the meridian, mimicking the pattern that you have on the ground, with the Sphinx looking due east and with his representation in the sky. We have gone through the geological argument suggesting that the Sphinx is much older and possibly related to the end of the last ice age, matching the date of 10,500 BC. We now have two sciences suggesting this. But let's look closer. We need to be absolutely sure that this is not a coincidence. Not that I believe that it is. So far we've had more compilation of coincidence that sooner or later we have to stop saying it's coincidence. But let's make sure, because we're dealing with something that is so utterly important that we cannot be uncertain about it. And this is it. There is a major causeway. The Egyptologists call this contraption that you see on the ground a causeway, linking the central pyramid to a temple near the Sphinx. We're not even sure if it is a temple, passing along the boundaries of the pit in which the Sphinx rests. They call it a causeway because they believe that it served as a causeway. They believe that the body of the king on a sledge was dragged up this causeway. Now this causeway is made of blocks of 100 tons apiece. It's gigantic. And they tell us that what they think this causeway served was to drag the body of a dead king only once, for 5 minutes or 20 minutes, to place him inside this pyramid. And of course, that we haven't found the body doesn't bother them at all. Frankly, this is like saying that we built the M6 motorway for only to use it once, for somebody to skate down, use a skateboard only once on it. It's totally ridiculous. 100-ton blocks to build a causeway for that kind of use. What they have not noticed, because they do not think in this way, is that this causeway has a very important astronomical alignment. It is directed 14 degrees to the right of due east, to the south of due east. They went to a lot of trouble to link and to push our attention now to a direction 14 degrees passing next to the Sphinx. Let's follow the clues. Here you are, the sun rising at 14 degrees to the left or to the right, to the south of due east. Now you remember that the amplitude between the summer solstice and the spring equinox is 28 degrees as seen from Giza. It does not take a genius to work out that 14 degrees is half the angle. And it is a very important angle to the ancients. We call it today the cross quarter, because it happens the sun rises at exactly that point 1 month before the spring equinox. What they're telling us is that something is happening and is becoming active 1 month before the spring equinox. Follow it and see what happens. Follow it to the spring equinox and see what happens. That is what they're telling us. So let's do that. The Sphinx, a rather faint picture, I'm afraid, but we didn't have a better one at this stage. Here is his rump, his pose, his head, and he's looking due east. And here is the causeway, pointing 14 degrees to the rising sun 1 month before the spring equinox. Let's go to 10,500 BC. We are in 10,500 BC, and let's look. And let's see what they want us to see. Now, is it possible that what they want us to see is something to do with this? Horus in the horizon, a Horus figure, a leonine figure, sitting inside the horizon. He is cut within the bedrock of Giza, and probably the terminology means he is inside the horizon. Let's see if that is what they want us to look at. Well, it is, because when we bring the sunrise at 14 degrees on the day that they tell us to do so, along the causeway, we see that the constellation of Leo is half risen, with only its shoulder and head sticking out of the horizon, the real horizon. And when you transpose this on the ground, this is what you have. Horus in the horizon, matching his counterpart in the horizon, as they tell us, as they invite us to find. Horus in the horizon, the Sphinx, looking at the Nile, facing the Nile east. In fact, I've transposed the picture of the Sphinx in the sky, looking at the Milky Way. I don't need to use the terrestrial map. I have it in the sky. And they're asking us to consider this point, where the sun is exactly on the day of the spring equinox below the constellation of Leo in 10,500 BC, and only in 10,500 BC. They're drawing our attention to this place, the Genesis place. Do we have a rendezvous in the sky in this place? Is that what they're trying to tell us? Well, let's remember the dualistic language. No. What they're trying to tell us, here is the constellation. Here is the Sphinx. We're looking at a point, at a place they consider to be the Genesis time, 10,500 BC, below the rump of the celestial line. We transpose this on the ground, and this is what we have. A point, a possible chamber, a genesis chamber. Let's see if I can focus this. There we are. Below the rump of the Sphinx. Now, so far, we have followed the clues step by step, and we have reasoned out, we have spoken these astroglyphs, we have received the message, and we begin to see that they are drawing our attention to this place on the ground. If the clues are right, this is what they're telling us to do. But is there evidence that something is there where there is? Graham may have pointed this out, but when John Anthony West did his geological work in 1991 to 93, they used seismographic equipment and identified a chamber, a rectangular cavity, a chamber underneath the front pose of the Sphinx. We are suggesting that there is a link, and that here we will find the so-called Genesis chamber, perhaps the Hall of Records. Do we have a rendezvous there? Does mankind have a rendezvous with Genesis there? Well, as I'm speaking, in November 1995, somebody entered a tunnel under the Sphinx. A tunnel at the rump of the Sphinx, leading to precisely the place where we have indicated. Who has entered the tunnel? Who is this shadowy figure that we see here? I will end my talk here, and I will hand the floor to Graham Hancock, because we have an important announcement to make concerning this matter and concerning also what's happening inside the Great Pyramid. Thank you very much.